So with our hardware, including our barrel now, I think pretty finished, we're ready to look at staining the stock. Now I have 3 stains here. I just happen to have in the shop from some other projects and things. These are just normal wood stains. These will work fine for what we're doing. If you're looking at building a nice high-end long rifle, I really encourage you to check out some of the gunstock or long rifle specific stains that you can get from a place like Dixie Gun Works or Flintlocks LLC, Chambers, or Kibblers. They're going to have some other, I think, some more historically accurate colors perhaps, and some more historically accurate mixtures. For what we're doing, these that you can just get at any home improvement store or hardware store are going to be just fine. Now we don't have something that's really handy when you're staining stocks, and that is a scrap piece of the same piece of wood that your stock is made out of. Because this is a pre-built kit and there's not really been any large chunks of wood we've taken off, we have to gamble a little bit here. And I've thought about this now for the past couple days as, man, what color are we going to stain the stock and how are we going to test colors? And the best thing I've come up with is using some of the internals of the stock that we're not going to see. Our barrel channel here is a perfect candidate for testing these stains. Now it's not finished to the same degree or the same technique as our outside is, but it is machined and it is pretty smooth. So we're gonna crack open these stains and dab a little bit here and there in the barrel channel to see what these colors are gonna look like on this stock. My whole thinking for this rifle, which I encourage you to come up with when you're building something like this, some kind of theme or design principle that you're trying to follow. If you're trying to make a nice, pretty polished gun, it's going to look different than what I'm doing, where I've got kind of an antiqued, worn, trying to make a gun that looks like it's been used a little bit. So a lot of times I've seen some of these finished out to be nice and kind of bright, warm reds, and I'm kind of leaning towards that a little bit, but I've got 3 stains here and I'm going to kind of let them decide where we're going to take these. These have been sitting for a while, so I want to make sure I get everything in the can stirred up. And this one is a Varathane Chestnut. This is this first color. And I'm just using a few Q-tips here just for this short application process. And then once we decide on a color, I will get a brush and then we can do the whole stock. Now the second color is a Varathane Gunstock color. All of these are kind of a warm brown. This one here is a bit redder. This one looks more like hot cocoa, I think. It's important that keep in mind that it will take a few coats. This wood is so dry when we put on the final application that it's going to soak up a lot. And this is a Minwax Cherry, number 235. Doesn't really look like cherry right now, does it? So this first one is our Varathane Chestnut. I'm just getting a Q-tip here. And I'm going to just put a little dot like that. And we'll do a couple coats here of each one just so we can try to get the full color. This is our Varathane Gunstock. And this is our Minwax Cherry, which admittedly I'm not very impressed with, that cherry. And if it helps you think about it, get your parts out and take a look at them kind of in the same space as the color that you're thinking about. So this is our Varathane Chestnut, Varathane Gunstock, and our Minwax Cherry, which I'm going to go ahead and mix it up a little bit more. I don't think it's performing as well as it should. So to be fair to each stain in this color testing process that I've got going here, I did this same, dabbing and checking procedure for 4 coats. And this took some time in between to let everything dry, but that 4 coat and dry coat, dry coat, dry coat process let me get a really good idea and a really true idea of what that color was going to be on that stock. And after I went through that process, I mean, this amount of stain doesn't take a whole lot of time. I think I was probably done with the weighting of it in about 45 minutes or so, just to make sure that everything dried. But in the end, I ended up going with the Varathane Gunstock stain. It gave me a nice color that I liked. It was warm, but not super red. The Minwax Cherry for me with this beech did not really go well for me. And the Varathane Chestnut gave me kind of a similar color to that cherry, which I wasn't really a fan of. So if you're looking at one of these kits and either of those stains, hopefully this gives you an idea of what that color is going to look like, and maybe you can go out and buy just one can. You don't need to buy 2 or 3 to make sure that you get the one that you want. Moving on now, we're going to get these cans out of the way and get a brush out and start applying some stain to this beech stock. Well, I am going to put on my apron. I don't want to mess up this nice shirt from Liberty and Company. Okay, here we go. I'll admit I'm a little nervous, but I think it'll come out. Now, I didn't pick this just because the name is Gunstock. I've actually been using the Minwax Gunstock stain for a lot of trim and boards in the house, and it's a much brighter red. I mean, it's almost like what I expected the cherry to be, really. But this is a much different color. But I like it. It's kind of muted. It's not super flashy or super bright, and I think it looks good with the aged parts that we tried to put together. And you don't need to get this big of a can, you know, for a project like this. I mean, we're going to use very little in comparison to what's in that can. But if you have a few of these that you like to put together, or have some other projects in the shop, it's worth it getting that big can. I do want to get those edges on that nose cap. I mean, not really going to see much of that because we fitted it, but I want to make sure it's colored. Oh, we got some runs there. We don't want those. So just be careful. I'm kind of moving around the whole stalk, trying to make sure that we don't have any of those runs like that. I don't think it'll dry really in time to cause an issue, but you don't want it to, just in case it does. And I'm not worried about in here in the channel or in the inlets. We don't want those. They don't need to be stained. You can if you want to, though, but you're never going to see that. And I could be using a bigger brush, too. This one was just handy. And it's kind of fun seeing it come together slowly. I guess the whole thing's been slow, though. This has been a really satisfying project to see come together like this. I think I started it about a week ago. A week ago tomorrow, I think, is when I cracked it open. So you can really put one of these together, I think, in a weekend if you really sit down and, you know, really power through it. And that really, too, depends on what kind of finish you want on your parts. You know, I mean, you can knock off 6 or 8 hours by not filing or sanding any of the brass pieces. So I'm going to be letting this first coat kind of set overnight, and then I'll come back and put on a second coat. That way we get a little bit of try to get some richer color going. And see, already up here on the fore end, on the muzzle, it's already pretty dry. So I'm going to flip it around here for the buttstock and get this end going. And there'll be times where there are spots that you miss, so the second coat lets you go through and make up for any of that. along with letting you get some richer color. I'm making real sure to get all the little corners around the inlet of the patch box here. We don't want any weird white spots there from the stock. And anytime I get a run like that, I just go through and kind of brush it out. That way there's no real definite lines there. We don't want those definite lines to dry weird and mess up our stock. And I think this is really coming out a little more red than I anticipated. But I think that second coat that we put in the barrel channel is really what darkened it up. So we'll get there. And the neat thing about this too, to keep in mind, is as you use it and as it gets, you know, that black powder grime on it, and it's going to age some. And, you know, carrying this through the woods on a walk or going on a hunt or going to a shoot is all going to put some natural dings and bumps and scratches and put some good age on it. So if you're like me and you're shooting to age it a little bit and try to give it some personality, don't sweat it if it still comes out a little new. See, in here you can really see the grain that I was talking about. I mean, this is not the extra fancy maple that you see, you know, from a really nice kit or a really nice custom built long rifle, but it's still got some grain. I mean, this isn't just a boring pine board. It has some texture, and I think that's something to be commended to traditions for. I mean, it's an affordable kit, but they're still throwing in some interesting wood. Now, I'm sure that not every one of their pieces is like this, but I'm really pleasantly surprised with the amount of texture in there. Now on this side where our cheek's going to be resting, there isn't a whole lot, but that's not too bad. The side with the patch box is really kind of the show and tell side anyway. So here's our stock as it is right now with the first coat of stain. The directions say to let it sit for 2 hours and then a second coat can be applied. So I'm going to let this sit and come back to it in a little bit and see if we can get some enhanced color there. I think a second coat will look nice. Right now we can still see some of the highlights of the, you know, the real plain beechwood stock, but I think there's a lot of room for us to really polish this up. So with my stock, I ended up putting on 3 coats of the stain and 3 coats of oil to go with it. I got a nice decent finish on everything. You can definitely go farther. I think the wood is going to take in only so much of the stain and the oil, but I found that getting to that third coat, I got a nice dark color with my stain. After I let my stock sit and dry from the oil, I think probably looking back on it over the weekend, I just let everything soak up and really finish and be done. I wiped it down with a rag just to get rid of any excess oil before I let it sit and dry out. And then when I came back to the shop, I hit it with my Scotch-Brite, and that kind of took out some of the shine from that stain that caught in there. It wasn't much, but it kind of got me started on wanting to try burnishing the stock with an antler. So I took a drop shed from the woods around here and took that to the stock and went around the whole stock just rubbing it with that antler. It's a real traditional technique used on a lot of long rifles, and it gives you kind of a neat finish. That burnishing will even out any uneven sanding that you had and get rid of some of the facets that you may have left, which for me was quite a few. I think it really made the gun look a little nicer, getting rid of some of those little spots here and there that I'd left. It gives you a little sense that the gun's a little denser now by compressing that wood a little bit. So if you have some antler laying around, or when you're working on the wood side of things, you know, just a hard metal rod will do the same thing for you. You just want to make sure that if you're burnishing with that metal rod, that there isn't any oil or you know, any residue on there that's going to then rub into your stock. The nice thing about the antler is it's super hard and it wasn't dirty, so it came through and burnished up real nice. After I burnished the entire stock, I went through, and it's nice when you have to have a light source to check that. I went through and just checked the whole stock just to make sure that everything had the same look and finish. And after I confirmed that a couple times, I went back through and fixed some spots, but I moved on to the oiling process. And a lot of different people have different opinions on oil. I just used a simple Danish oil that I had here in the shop, and it's just a nice, natural, even oil to put on gun stocks like this. So I went through with just a brush, applied a coat. What I found and what was recommended to me to do was just sit with the stock and just continually apply a coat of oil for about 45 minutes or an hour, and just going over from the front to the back of the stock and just continually coating that as it dries out. This is going to give you a nice, deep first coat of oil. It's really going to penetrate that stock. And after that hour or so, I wipe it down with a rag just to get rid of any excess oil. Leaving any excess oil on that stock is going to leave you a really sticky, really nasty stock that can be hard to deal with. Speaking from experience there, you don't want to come back the next morning, just have a sticky mess then that you have to clean up. So you want to just apply a thin coat that's really almost soaking up and absorbing in front of you, and then let that sit overnight and kind of penetrate and come back the next morning. In between coats of oil, it's good to hit it with a Scotch-Brite pad like we used on the brass hardware pieces. This is going to clean up any extra oil residue that might be on the stock and give you kind of an even, clean canvas to start with on your next coat. I went through and applied a total of 3 coats of oil to my stock. You can continually add oil to get the finish that you want. I was looking for kind of a matte finish on my stock, but the more oil you add, the more it's going to build up and become a kind of a protective layer over your stock. So if you're looking for something nice and shiny, you can continually add that oil to keep building that up. After I let my 3rd coat of oil dry, I went over it again with just a shop rag and then a Scotch-Brite just to kind of matte down the stock again. And that gave me the feel that I was going for with my stock. Like I said, we weren't going for a high polish, super nice gun, but I can feel that oil in there kind of on top of that wood grain, but I can still feel my tool marks a little bit here and there, and I can still feel that wood. So I feel like I'm really got a good hold on the gun, and it's got the feel that I was looking for. So that's really what it's up to, especially when you're building your own kit or putting together your own muzzleloader. It's all about what you're looking for in the gun. And with that, I think we're ready to do the final assembly on this. We've got all of our parts treated, our stock is ready to go, and it's time to see what it looks like all together. You don't realize what you do when you're talking until you're looking at yourself talking.